welcome everybody to the Retirement Success in Maine podcast. My name is Ben Smith. Allow me to introduce my co-host, the Mount Desert to my Peaks Island, Curtis Wister. How are you doing today, Curtis?
I'm doing well, Ben. Doing well. I like the island theme today. It's, the sun's out. It's getting a little warmer. We may not be at the end of winter, but I think we're getting there. So
we're closer to spring. You got to think warm thoughts and things.
Exactly.
And I know. Obviously, we've covered a lot of topics lately on our show, and one that I think you and I have seen a little bit more from our population that we service as financial advisors is anxiety.
Yeah.
And people getting a little bit more wrapped up around or worried about things or nervous about things. And it's something that, again, we've seen and it's found more obviously than depression and cognitive disorders sometimes in older adults.
Yeah.
And I'm going to quote a WebMD article. I know, but what the resources we found that 10 to 20% of older adults suffer from anxiety.
Yeah.
And we all have family members and friends and relatives that we just know anxiety is something that, that constant state of worry is something that's kind of present in our lives.
Absolutely.
So again, in our practice, of course, we see these signs and we see untreated anxiety start to shrink our clients' worlds, right? And
that's right.
And I think what we want to do in our show and in a lot of our practices, well, we have money, we now are retired. What are we trying to do with this money and how do we expand our worlds? How do we experience more of life?
Mm-hmm.
And when we start getting more anxious about, say, traveling to other parts of the world or social situations or being judged. So all of those pressures happen. Then I don't go to social situations as much.
Right.
Maybe I don't go to the doctor, right? I don't get checkups because I'm anxious or worried about hearing possible bad news.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't have to be this way, does it? So there are things that we can all do to address our anxiety and help us manage our fears, whether they're logical or illogical. So that's what we want to talk about today and have a discussion about managing anxiety as we age.
Absolutely, Ben. And, as we like to do on our show, we like to bring in experts. You and I are nowhere near experts in this topic.
Nope.
So our guest joining us today attended Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine, where he earned a bachelor's with a double major in psychology and music.
Nice combo.
Yeah, exactly. So after an unsettled year of living for brief periods on Martha's Vineyard, in Bristol, England, and Raymond, Maine, which I think is just a fascinating trio of places, which we might need to explore. He spent the next decade in the Great Midwest, completing, a master's and Ph.D. in psychology at the University of Nebraska and a clinical psychology predoctoral internship at Indiana University Medical School. So for more than the past 17 years, he's worked at Northern Light Acadia Hospital as a psychiatric treatment, Northern Light Acadia Hospital, a psychiatric treatment facility in Bangor, as a psychologist, program director, and quality improvement director. He has always found teaching to also be among his greatest interests and passions. His areas of professional work have included improving the integration of primary care and mental health, improving healthcare quality and organizational performance, in the use of measurement and applied research in healthcare settings. His clinical interests include bariatric surgery, group psychotherapy, and treatment of schizophrenia. Husson University's health administration and public health major allows him to pull together these many areas of interest to prepare the next generation of healthcare workforce in an industry that provides endless academic and practical challenges. So currently living in Hamden, Maine with his wife, Diana, also a psychologist, and their 3 daughters. He spends a lot of his time working for Hamden Psychological Consultation. He's an avid runner and a not quite so avid hiker. He spends what free time is left, which based off that bio, I don't think is much, enjoying the many benefits of living in Maine. So with that, please join me in welcoming David Prescott to the Retirement Success in Maine podcast. David, thank you so much for coming on our show today.
Thanks, Curtis. I appreciate that. It almost sounds like you're describing somebody else. Yeah, that's a lot of years there you covered. Thank you.
So, David, obviously we read the bio and we're now acquainted with some of your through thread. We always just like to get to know you a little bit and kind of what makes you tick. Love to hear a little bit about kind of maybe the soft part of your background and what drew you to a career in psychology.
Yeah. I probably started at the point like a lot of folks who end up in psychology, you enjoy helping people. I enjoy listening to people. So I think that's a big thing that you like to listen. And you find the question of what makes people do what they do fascinating, and that still does it. I had the really good fortune. I grew up in Lebanon, New Hampshire, which is right next to Dartmouth College and Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. And I had the good fortune to work summers when I was in college as a psychiatric technician on their mental health unit up there. And I got hooked. I loved the work. I loved helping people. But I'm still just curious, right? I never get tired of trying to understand what people are thinking, what makes them tick, how they're put together, and how they handle problems. And so that is probably the biggest thing. The biggest life or biggest lesson for me as a psychologist is to shut my mouth and listen, because usually most people, if you can guide them, will come to a solution for their problems by themselves. What you tell them, 90% of it, they hear it at the moment, but it's gone when they walk out the door.
I like that. So as I read off there a couple minutes ago, you have experienced many other parts of this country and the world throughout your life. Why have you chosen Maine? Like, what made Maine the place to be?
I think about that year from Martha's Vineyard to England back to Raymond. It was a little random. Like a lot of people, even though New Hampshire is a beautiful state, where our family used to come here to vacation over in Western Maine, actually over in the lakes around Bridgeton and Freiburg and that. And then I had the good chance to go to school here. I was really lucky to get a lot of help in both finding Bowdoin College and then being able to, frankly, to afford it, which was beyond my family's reach. But they helped out a lot. And there's something, I often tell people that there was a similarity between Maine and Nebraska. The pragmatism of the people, the rural nature of the states, and I think the fact that the people at the end of the day value helping each other and what's going to work rather than any type of ideology or difference, based on anything else, just permeates Maine, I think, and certainly did with Nebraska. So when we got a chance to come back to Maine, they were building Acadia Hospital. We didn't know it. Diana and I were living in Indiana, and they were recruiting like mad. So we thought we'd try it for a year or two, and that was in 1994.
Here you are.
Stuck. Okay.
Yeah, I love the people here. I really do.
Yeah.
And David, I know that there'll be something we'll talk a little bit more about here over time, of obviously the people here and that and kind of what makes us tick as a group, right? And kind of some of the things that we find. But let's go back to Northern Light Acadia Hospital here a little bit. So talk about, obviously, I know you've had several hats over the years with Acadia. Tell us about your role currently and what impacts you've seen at Northern Light over your career there. What have you kind of seen happen since, again, as you're saying, since inception, almost 94 through now? What have you kind of seen the difference being made with that organization?
Yeah, I had the good fortune when I came up, the folks that developed and built Acadia Hospital, who were concerned members of our community, to talk about their own personal experience, either themselves or a close family member, of when somebody needed really top-notch psychiatric and mental health care, having to go to Boston if they needed to go in the hospital for treatment, and how disruptive that felt. And just, like any of us that have had to travel for a medical, condition, it just wears you out. And they really took the idea, why can't we build a first-rate, world-class psychiatric hospital here in Bangor? And they knew how to make it happen. So, and I continue through as I've been at the hospital through, watching the mental health evolve and the whole the opiate epidemic, which has had a huge impact on mental health services, and some of the things we now recognize in kids like autism spectrum disorder, which was rare, partly because we missed it, partly because we think it's going up. It's just been a pleasure to be able to tell somebody, like if you see me in the emergency room and you see them in therapy, something other than, hey, look, we're going to have to send you down to Boston, we're going to have to send you to New York, or even just down to Portland. That always feels good, right? That never gets old.
Right? Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I know the topic we want to really dive into today, right? Talking about managing anxiety as we age. So as we kind of transition into the beef of the conversation, we think it's best to always just start with some foundational knowledge, right? So for our listeners, can you just kind of give us a definition of an anxiety disorder, right? So what are some of the most common anxiety disorders? What are the symptoms? And kind of tell us how maybe we could talk about anxiety related issues with a doctor.
Yeah, and that's really important. And we may return to this, but having anxiety in and of itself is not bad, wrong, or abnormal. We all do. It serves a purpose. But the things we look for in mental health are panic disorder, which is repeated panic attacks. So, and having a panic attack in and of itself is not terribly uncommon, but having repeated ones. So we have that. We have something called generalized anxiety disorder, where anxiety, instead of focused on one thing, has spread to like everything in your life. So everything makes you anxious. Right? So panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. There's debate in the field about obsessive compulsive disorder, whether or not to count it as an anxiety disorder. Okay. So we have that. The other thing we see a lot are people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, who've been through some horrible thing, often things that are hard to listen to, abuse, neglect, some very difficult trauma, but they get a lot of anxiety associated with that. So kind of those generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and maybe for some obsessive compulsive disorder.
I like that.
So, David, and you mentioned panic disorder. Let's just kind of dig into that one specifically as a common type of anxiety disorders, and just seeing like my grandparents as they age, and you could see that there's things that kind of created this kind of panic attack. So again, I know I have several people I obviously know that have had anxiety issues, but so why do panic attacks occur? And then what are some triggers of those attacks, right? So how do we kind of like, let's kind of get to the kind of core root of like, why are they happening to us? And then what are some triggers that you kind of see over time that you kind of feel like they're kind of more common to be associated with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Interestingly, a lot of people, the first time they have a panic attack, show up at the hospital thinking they're having a heart attack. So so it feels a lot the same from what we listen to people. So the physical symptoms, you get all of a sudden like your heart is beating really, really fast. You can't catch your breath. Your kind of scope of vision narrows, right? You're just, all you can think about is the anxiety. Often they're shaking, people are sweaty. They feel like they're going to die. They do that. And it is intense. Right? One of the things we find for people is that once you've had one, you will go a long way to avoid having another, including kind of turning your life in a pretzel, just, upside down and in and out. So people get that kind of thing. The onset is usually pretty, it's a rapid ascent, right? It's like climbing up, one side of a roller coaster really, really fast. And they get there and they feel like they can't get out of it. They feel like they can't breathe, like they can't slow themselves down. It's incredibly subjectively unpleasant. So now what we think, I often tell people to think of what happened to your body when you like almost got in a car accident or almost fell off a very high place, or something where you had one of those kind of experiences, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I would ask you guys, do you remember what happened? Like maybe if you've ever almost been in a car accident, what the experience was and what happened to your body.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah.
So what was it? I'll put you guys on the spot a little here. Like what?
Yeah. So I would just say like, so here, of course, lose control of the car. Right. And so for me, I was in high school, like driving home, hit black ice, lose control. I'm in the moment and it's like nothing I can do in the moment to kind of control it. And the car's just going where it wants to go. I hit a guardrail, right? And in that moment, it just all of a sudden I'm just seize right up, hit the brakes as much as I can. And I don't even comprehend like what just happened to me. Yeah. It took me a second of like, well, I'm in high school. What do I tell my parents? Do I, right? And I'm just, all of a sudden I get very frightened. I get very, I just am in survival mode all of a sudden. Yeah. And I'm just, I just start like then driving back away. And I'm like, wait, should I even be doing that right now? It's just, I just lost complete control over what I should be doing, what's rational, logical, all that. So that was my experience.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of just, so I guess thankfully mine isn't, I think, as in depth as that one. So what I'm thinking of, honestly, it happened probably 6 months ago, just driving down Stillwater Avenue here in Bangor. And thankfully the technology in vehicles now, I think the car stopped before I could have registered and stopped it myself. But someone just pulled out in front of me, I think coming out of like Hannaford area grocery store. And it was one of those that just, I guess the post it happening feeling, I think, is where you're going. And like, yes. I'm sitting in my car, like trying to process what just happened, right? I'm kind of taking inventory. I'm like, did I hit what happened here? And everything was fine, but my heart's going like crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think I ended up pulling into, like, I was headed to Best Buy or something. And I just kind of sat there for a minute, like, hold on, relax. My Apple Watch is pinging at me. It's like your heart rate's going through the roof. Like, what's going on here? But I think where you're trying to go, it just all of a sudden, to Ben's point, my body just locked up, and I was like, what happened? What I miss? Like, where am I? That kind of feeling, and it's just, it's crazy, I guess, is the only way I can interpret kind of what I was feeling.
Yeah, exactly. And you do feel crazy. So yeah, those are both great examples. So what happens in those things, you notice one of the things that happens is there's a little bit of a delay between, like, when you see the other car or you realize you're skidding, and when your heart starts going and you're breathing and you're sweating and you're breathing really fast. So that's as most of us know, that's your fight or flight system getting switched on. It takes a few seconds for it to fully mobilize. So that's what's happening. And once that flips on, all those physiological responses are just going to run its course. You can slow it down, lessen its impact, but it's going to go, right? You can't stop that kind of feeling. All right, that's what happens. So in a panic attack, what we think happens is that gets flicked on, that system that's hardwired into you, but it's not for a physical danger kind of thing. Right. In your situations, there was a danger, your hand where you were going to get, crunched. And with the guardrail, right, you're doing that. But we find for people with panic attack, it's something else. It's a psychological thing that turns that system on and it kind of reinforces it, right? It's the danger, perceived danger keeps going and going. And it's really hard to think, Ben, what you were saying, exactly like you start, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Your ability to sort of organize and figure out rationally what to do next is just kind of shot all to pieces. Mm-hmm. So that's the experience.
So David, you made a point about this mental pretzel that people get in, right? Is like, hey, I went through this fight or flight moment. Yeah. I elevated myself into this kind of unsettling physical state. Mm-hmm. And so let's use kind of maybe my example of I'm in my car and I lost control. Mm-hmm. So are you saying essentially, like, because like maybe that's the thing that led to a panic attack for me, so that I would then have anxiety, or I would try to avoid maybe getting back in that car because I'm so worried about a repeat event and leading up to a panic attack that I just avoid that activity altogether?
Yes, exactly. That's what happens. And the other thing you see sometimes is that people have trouble identifying what it was that triggered the panic attack. Our minds are processing a lot of information. So you will start to have one, and I've worked with people, they cannot at first figure out why, right? Sometimes it's really obvious.
Yep.
But this is, this not only with, and we're talking a little bit about, with people as you age and anxiety and stuff like that, but there can be things around your house. It can be like sorting through the mail and you see like a bill or something that you don't want to think about, and you put it aside, but your mind kind of grabs onto it. And then a little while later, all of a sudden you're having a panic attack and you say, I can't figure out where this came from. Usually you can back up and find where the trigger is. Sometimes they're very obvious,
Sure.
you get into something like that. But for some people, the cues, what sets it off, is often pretty subtle, and you have to kind of get into what their subconscious or barely conscious mind is processing, and back it up to that will cause it. In those cases, people are often turning their lives upside down. They don't know what caused it, and so they just kind of freeze for a while because they just don't want to have another one.
That's interesting. So I want to keep going here and talk specifically about older adults. So as Ben mentioned, I think in the intro, so as our role as financial planners, we see financial insecurity kind of being an anxiety trigger often for that population that we work with, especially in, looking back at the year of 2022 when they may see losses in their portfolio and it just starts to become feeling overwhelming for them. I just want to ask, so what are some other topics that you see as common anxiety triggers in this group of people? And then I'll have a couple follow-ups after that, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, and the financial insecurity is certainly one. For some people, I see kind of the question of what the heck am I supposed to do now with my life can cause a lot of anxiety. Yeah. We spend a lot of time, for many people who have families and careers and such that are meaningful, you're just kind of driving through that from your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And it really is a shift in kind of, okay, what's my purpose? What am I all about? Kind of, we call existential anxiety. But I think we're really patient with young people to go through that. There's a whole lot of things about, okay, what are you going to do? Try this. It's okay that you haven't figured it out and all those kind of things. We don't seem to have that same thing built into our society with older people. We're like, what do you mean you've been alive for 65 years? Why can't you figure out what you're supposed to be doing here? So I think that is a common trigger. The other thing, loss of mild loss of mental functioning or physical functioning is often really anxiety producing for people. So it's normal to have a little bit of we've studied this quite a bit, cognitive slowing. Like, for example, for older people, it's normal to take longer to solve a problem or read something or process something. You're just as good as you always were, but you start to think, oh man, I'm losing my edge, I'm losing that. And people's anxiety about losing their memory can really go right, take them right up the ramp in a big hurry. So loss of mental functioning, loss of physical functioning, and kind of that general transition about, so what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, no, those are all really great points you brought up. And as you were explaining the cognitive slowing, I mean, I can only imagine what that, I'm sure you would just spiral into, is this like, am I losing my mind? Do I have dementia? Do I, so I can just only imagine that. I want to ask, so if I'm an older adult, what are some ways that you think I can manage that anxiety better as I age? Specifically in this question, say without medication.
Yeah. And while psychology, we're not experts at medication, it can be, every physician I've ever talked to says it's usually more tricky in the elderly, the older you get, because you process them slower and different. So the thing to avoid, I think, for a lot of people, when they're kind of going up an anxiety peak, it's like they get almost to the top of the mountain and then they stop and run away. Right? And what you start to learn, this is what we do when we treat clinical anxiety, is that a lot of people have learned that escape and avoidance, either getting out of the situation or just not thinking about it, is how I'm going to manage my anxiety. So we're like, it's literally like when we were kids, you used to like put your hands on your ears and go, la, la, la,
Sure,
la,
sure,
that kind of thing. But a lot of people, they deal with their anxiety by avoidance. And then it just keeps coming back over and over again, right? It comes and they have to work harder to shut it off. So the first thing I say to people is I walk them through that whole anxiety scenario. Okay, so tell me what happens if your memory isn't really as good? What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that? And you find a couple things happen. One is it's rarely as scary as you make it out to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is you start to figure out what to do about the situation that's causing you anxiety. So you push a little bit through. Some people are really good at it naturally. You push a little bit through trying to fight that tendency to just not think about it.
Yep. And David, I'll kind of echo that, because I know just as we're talking to the population that we support, right, is, right now we're meeting with people and it's like we're reviewing results that are really probably not something that they really want to talk about or see, or they know they have losses, but I think they're scared that, well, we're going to come to them and say, hey, that lifestyle that you've been living, what that means is that you're not going to be able to enjoy your lifestyle anymore. Or so they have this avoidance of, I don't want to have this conversation, because if you tell me that I'm not able to live the life that I'm living now, and if I just avoid it, then maybe the results turn around tomorrow and everything's all solved for itself. And of course, we're trying to do this of, hey, well, let's just talk about where we are. Let's have a productive conversation about, hey, what can we do? What behaviors can we adjust to get ourselves back on track to maybe enjoy the lifestyle that you're looking to have long term? And let's ignore it, and then hopefully it goes away, and then maybe it doesn't, right? So I think that we kind of have that a lot with that kind of group that we work with, and it's, I think, on us of, they're paying us to kind of think about their best selves long term, and I think that's where we're trying to kind of help them. But I want to ask a kind of another question here, and you gave me a quote. Is it Hans Selye?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, Hans Selye, a pioneer in stress research. He says the absence of stress is death. So you were saying earlier, right? A little bit of anxiety is actually a good thing, right? Is that, hey, getting a little bit of anxiety means we care, and it can enhance performance and keep us focused. If we didn't have any anxiety at all, we might be a little bit more laissez-faire and just kind of bebopping through life that way. So my question to you, David, is, so help us distinguish what is helpful anxiety and what is unhelpful anxiety.
Yeah. I'm glad I forgot I gave you that quote. I love that one. He was an interesting guy, Hans Selye. He did his original stress research. He was a little bit mean, really. He would toss a rat or a mouse in a vat of water that had like straight steel sides so it couldn't climb out, and watch it stress itself out. I don't think he killed them, but he would let it get really, really stressed until it was about to drown, and then measure like its adrenaline levels and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So you just wonder. Anyway. But still, he had some good quotes, right? Yeah, I think and most of us realize this intuitively if we think back to it, but a little bit of anxiety makes you a little better at what you're doing at the moment. So, think of you in school or something like that, right? If you were taking a test, or if you were a team sports participant, right? You could, you wanted to be a little bit on edge when you went into a situation. And that helps us in many situations. Performers talk about this, but just every day. It's so that's not necessarily bad. And the fact that you're a little bit anxious about something can be, if you can get your mind to think, this is telling me something that I need to pay attention to, rather than I need to stop now because I don't want to worry about this, right? But use it as a signal, right? This is telling me something I need to pay attention to. I wonder what it is. Let's talk about it, think about it. So, and a little bit of anxiety gets us through. It helps us get through all the things we have to do in our day. Or if you're worried about a deadline, you're going to get that form or that paper in, or make that phone call or something like that. So it's quite helpful. People who don't, take an extreme, people who don't care and have no anxiety or apprehension about anything, just don't pay it any attention. So, part of it is just trying to harness and mobilize your own anxiety. It's a little bit energy. Now, we've seen for everybody when it gets too much, right? If you've ever gone over the thing, and I use performance or athletics a lot. If you're too keyed up when you go up to bat or swing a golf club or try to, recite the poem when you were a kid in front of your class and something like that, then you screw up. Right, you just get disorganized. So, keep a lot of it is keeping it in that sweet spot.
That's interesting. So I want to rotate to the idea of caretakers, right? So let's say I'll use myself as an example. Say I'm taking care of my dad or my mom, a family member, neighbor, whoever it may be. What tips or advice would you give to caretakers, right, to help them approach the subject of anxiety and how to best help that person they're caring for?
Yep. And this is really hard. Caretaking is just, it's going to happen more and more, but it is a real shift in most people's lives. You're just getting a whole nother channel in there. So for one of the things that you have to overcome, as others have talked about, oftentimes your roles are shifting, right? So you're like, okay, how do I give my loved one, often my mom or my dad or my aunt or my uncle or older brother or sisters, how do I give them advice? Because it always went the other way.
Sure.
This sounds a little lame, but mostly I tell people, yes, it just feels weird. So I think that being direct, getting it out in the open is a big thing. Rarely have I ever talked to somebody who's anxious or wound up that they haven't thought about it or haven't noticed, right? You're not telling them something they don't know, right? So I get it out there. And then, I was saying very early on, if I've learned anything or trying to learn, it's to listen more than I talk. And when you're going to bring it up, probably the best thing you can say after you bring it up is nothing. I had a friend who said, bite your lower lip. Just ask them what, is that true? Tell me a little more about it. And then I usually ask them solutions, right? And I don't say, what do you think we should do about it? I say, what have you thought about doing about it?
Yeah.
Because people have some ideas, right? Because if you say, what do you think I'll do about it? Usually they say, I don't know.
Right.
But if you say, what have you thought about doing about it? So be direct, listen more than you talk, right? And ask what they've thought about doing about it. Usually people feel better that it's out there.
Yeah.
So David, I want to ask, we try to obviously in this podcast, we're trying to give things of advice of things that people should know about and help them, right? So it's one thing to say, here's some things to do. There's another kind of way to look at this is, what are things that we shouldn't be doing, right? What are some mistakes that we all make? We probably know are wrong, or probably not the way to address things, or maybe the most productive ways to attack things. But I could see where, hey, I have anxiety, and I'm retired, and I could just, as you said, just suppress it, right? It's like, hey, I'm having panic attacks, and if I go near a car, I have a panic attack, so I just don't go near cars anymore. That's as simple as that, right? I suppress it. Or when I have maybe a few beers, right? Maybe that helps me. I have a few beers and I get in that car and I don't have a panic attack. So if I just continually have a few beers in me all the time, then that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever, have recreational drugs, or you see my point about there's poor outlets maybe for anxiety of, if I just maybe self-medicate, if I kind of self-diagnose, and as you said, I think we all can work ourselves into the mental pretzel at times. there's other ramifications of those things which could lead to mistreatment of loved ones, right? Is all of a sudden someone starts yapping at me that I'm drinking too much, or right there's all this. I have other behavioral issues that come out of this kind of core issue. So my question is, what do you see as common mistakes that us as we age that we're making as we try to self-diagnose and self-medicate our issues?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and some of them are not unique to aging, although the impact on our body or our bodies can't take as much. So you mentioned, have a few beers or something. Alcohol is one, and that is it's ingrained in our culture, I think, right? We say to somebody, "Oh, you seem wound up. You need to go have a good stiff drink." Right? It's just in there. I think it's important to remember with medicine or alcohol or anything, as you age, your body's ability to process that quickly is not as good as it once was. So the same amount it'll take you longer to process it. You can get, an effect that's more than you think it is. So that's a good one. Some people, they've struggled either previously in their life or it kind of comes back. You thought you had it licked, but now it's kind of come back. There are other things we do. People talk about stress eating, right? So sometimes we do, but in any age, a whole bunch of weight gain or not eating real good foods. I mean, it's basic. It's like the advice your mom gave you when you were 4, but it really does often not help you. People who are cigarette smokers, oftentimes you see that they will increase that, and those just tend to compound the problem. So you want to watch that. The other thing, Ben, I think you mentioned, but you kind of, to make the point explicit, a lot of times I see people in counseling settings who will talk, they get referred for anger. Usually somebody else says that you're snappy, you're irritable, you're yelling at me. I find that anxiety is underneath that. Interesting. So interesting, and we've all done it, right? When you're stressed out and somebody does something that you consider stupid, words come out your mouth or things that you do that you're thinking, whoa. But some people aren't really aware of it, that what's really driving their irritability or their anger is anxiety. And if you can get underneath of that, it's a lot more, we respond a lot better to somebody saying, hey, what's worrying you these days, than quit being such a jerk.
Right. Sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I want to talk about medication here, and I know that's kind of a continuation there. Maybe not self-medicating anymore, but actual doctor medicating. So when does a doctor or patient know kind of when it's time to go on medication to assist with managing anxiety? And I'll pause there. And I have a couple follow-ups.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. In the mental health profession, it's a little less clear for guidelines. Like for depression, we usually say if you're depressed for 2 straight weeks, you should probably go get treated or consider medication. It's not a bad guideline if you've been struggling with anxiety or having repeated panic attacks for a couple straight weeks. I think it's a good idea to go talk to somebody. I think having an honest conversation about your preferences with your doctor, your psychologist, your anybody is really good. People are all over the map with their own self-acceptance of anxiety medication. Some people really like that idea. Some people don't. Yeah. If you look at the research over time, mostly what happens if you compare medication to counseling, say, medication gives you a little bit benefit first, but then after a while, counseling catches up and they stay pretty even over time. There's a little bit of evidence that in the long term, psychotherapy or counseling will hold its progress longer. People tend to, So I would guess, say to your question, part of it, without being, flip about it, is when you think you want to do something. 2 straight weeks is not a bad idea. And then there's different ways that people who prescribe medication go at anxiety. And there's different types of medication that will do different things for you. So that's a good conversation to have.
Yeah. So I'm just going to keep going on the medication question. So so in this scenario, say now I'm on medication for my anxiety.
Yeah.
How do we know when it's time, and how do you all know when it's time to up or maintain or lower a dosage for that maintenance of my anxiety?
Yep. When I talk to my psychiatrist and primary care friends, we say a couple things. A lot of the medication they're using these days for anxiety were actually originally marketed as antidepressants. So Prozac, Paxil, Effexor, venlafaxine, Zoloft. And those seem to have, the first effect they has is it helps your mood a little bit, and then later they help anxiety. Those don't work. It's not like taking a relax pill, right? You don't feel it for quite a while. So the question of that, when do you know when to up it? The first thing is often you've got to give it a couple weeks before you get that anxiety effect. Some of the anxiety meds, we don't use them as much anymore. The old ones we had, like when I was growing up, my grandma took them, it was like Valium and stuff. Those you want to be really careful about upping the dose because they're a little bit addictive. And what you're doing is you're developing tolerance to them. And people get, this is not the most clinical term, they get sloppy. Their behavior, kind of speech is a little bit slurred and that. So those you probably don't want to.
No, that makes sense. So then just kind of from where you're sitting now and kind of looking backwards over your career, like I know you just mentioned Valium and no longer, certainly used a lot. What advancements are happening or have happened and are happening right now kind of in the treatment of anxiety? Yeah,
it's good. Physicians are getting really good. Sometimes they're using what you see them do, medications that just target anxiety and certain things. They use things like a medication called propranolol and that, but it takes away the physical reaction of anxiety, and often that can break the cycle. Remember, we said that fight or flight cycle.
Sure.
So really all they're doing, I'm going to oversimplify it, but they're just kind of lowering your blood pressure and your breathing rate and everything physiologically. That'll often help. So we're getting better at that. Actually, the use of those antidepressants for anxiety has been a big shift in the last 10 or 15 years. I would say the other thing I see a lot is the incorporation of non-medical and non-psychological techniques. People are really getting into, and it's good for anxiety, yoga, mindfulness, meditation, that kind of stuff. And it's awesome to me to see these be so available now. I think the pandemic helped us with that one. Because you can get these really top-notch kind of classes on Zoom and you don't have to go to a studio, which is great, but our lives are busy. So I'm pleased to see all those kinds of thoughts. It's good stuff.
So David, I want to ask another question here, and some of it is, so here I am, right? And I'm, I feel like anxiety's just kind of becoming more of a prevalent issue in my life, right? And I'm aging, and I'm just sensing it's just something where it's just taking a hold of different parts, or I'm avoiding things, or I'm doing more of other things. I guess my question is, if I want to do something about that, first steps would be go to my primary care physician and have that conversation with it. It's kind of like, if I'm going to look for help, I guess my question is, where's the best and first place to go?
I think you nailed it. And as much as I would like somebody to call up a psychologist or a licensed therapist in my profession, unless you know somebody personally, if you use the internet, you do a Google search on, psychologists around Bangor or something, and all you get are these faces and names, and you just don't know anything about it. So I love going to primary care. You can rule out, sometimes you will find health shifts in your physical health that are causing anxiety or for depression, mood disturbance or stuff like that. So they can rule that out pretty quickly, or at least start to investigate it. But yeah, I would go to my primary care and they know people. They know who's reliable. And they can probably tell you somebody that is maybe not that reliable. But they're going to be your fastest way to get in. We're so stacked up in wait lists and I know primary care is too, but in psychology and psychotherapy, a lot of people I've talked to have called around and they're like 5 months, 7 months. That's too long to wait.
Yeah. And especially as you're saying from hey, I've been dealing with something for 2 weeks, right? And this is something where I feel like it's getting worse and worse and worse and I need help. Is to be able to, and I think the great thing about your profession, David, which is similar to us, it's a relationship business, right? It's like hey, I want to sit down with somebody that I feel can listen to me, understand what's happening, help me progress and advance through it. So it's such a big deal. And so I guess that's where I wanted to go, is that if versus, as you said, like, hey, I am struggling with this issue, I know we don't use the yellow pages anymore, but Google or whatever, right? I was about to say that. I was like, we don't use the yellow pages. Yeah. So just to kind of scroll through the Rolodex and say, let's just start calling everybody and kind of see who can get in, right? Because I think from the PCP side is like, well, hey, at least maybe I already have that relationship and then they know what's happening with me and they can kind of go with, do you think psychotherapy is the best route? And then get in versus just self-diagnose. I just need counseling and I'm just going to go to that, right? So it sounds like you're kind of 6 to 1, half dozen the other from that side about, hey, I had this 2-week issue and I might take another month to get to my PCP and I just go and jump to it. I don't have to get a referral, is I guess what I'm hearing.
Right, exactly. And you hit upon you've helped me think a lot, Ben, about the similarities in our businesses, that it is about relationship ultimately. And the other thing I tell people when they try it out, and I don't know if y'all do this in your thing, but I think the people that are best at our professions, they're very genuine. They say, let's talk. You figure out what I'm all about. I'll figure out what you're all about. And then for heaven's sake, let's say right away, if we don't think we click, let's just say that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because again, I think it's a two-way street. We both don't want to be unhappy when we're sitting down together. So I think that's a really big deal. So I think that's exactly right. And David, I want to ask another question, because again, one is to get services, but also from the, hey, I'm looking on the web, and I know I made the faux pas right in my intro of looking up WebMD statistics on things, but we all kind of look at WebMD like, oh, yeah. I have these 8 symptoms. Let's Google them all, and that's going to tell me that I'm terminal with 2 weeks left to live here. Yeah. So my question here is, hey, listeners out there, I have some anxiety. I have, I think, unhelpful anxiety that's happening to me right now. I want to go look at some resources that I think might get me on a path to start. Again, we examined the PCP and direct to kind of psychotherapy counselor side. What resources would you have them check out to educate themselves about the issues we're discussing today?
That's a really good question. And I did it yesterday too. I had I don't know if you can see my left eye is a little bit red. So the first thing I did was I went to WebMD.
Yeah,
I did that, and then I called my doctor. Yeah, it's a really good question, and again, I'm sure in your profession too. A Google search will pull up for you. This is a little bit cynical, but whoever has paid Google the most money to rise to the top of the search.
Yeah. That's right.
So the ones I like to tell people, the American Psychological Association, it's our professional association, they are really careful about this, and they have help topics. They really broaden them out, so you don't have to just say anxiety. You can do panic, you can do PTSD, you can do all of that. And they're, oh my word, my profession, I love them to death, but they're meticulous to a fault. So before they get anything up there, they've had a bunch of people who think they're always right go over it with a fine-tooth comb and come to agreement. So the American Psychological Association is a really good one. The other one that I like to go to the National Institute of Health or the National Institute of Mental Health. So these are federally funded research agencies, but where they've shifted their their web presence for the general public is on these kind of help topics for that. They realize that people go to that as an authoritative source. So they have some really, really nicely worded, clear, user-friendly, if you will, kind of things. So, I tell people that American Psychological Association or the National Institute of Health, and if you do that, National Institute of Health Anxiety, you'll get a really nice 2 or 3 page handout on symptoms, differential diagnosis, treatment options. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And we'll make sure to have those resources available in our show notes too. So for listeners, don't worry, you don't have to remember that. We'll have the links right there for everyone. So we have one final question for you, David. So obviously our show is all about retirement success. So we like to ask all of our guests, how are you going to find your personal retirement success when you get there?
Okay.
Yeah. Threw you a curveball, didn't I?
Toughest question of all.
That's a really good question. If I'm honest, I think a little part of me doesn't ever think I'm going to stop working. And even as I say those things out loud, and I know that it's not logical, and I had been advised by other people who do what you do, that they're kind of in a nice way say, yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Now let me tell you how it really goes.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. What's been helpful for me is even within my profession of psychology is to do some things about trying to get my retirement success has to do with me remembering or reminding myself of there are many things that are important to me, but what things are most important to me. And I was doing something recently. It was like a forced choice kind of thing, but it only gave you a couple seconds. You couldn't stew about it. And it said, what's more important, this or this? What would you rather do, this or this? And then it calculates a thing to show you, and it really rang true. So I think my idea for retirement success is to remember, if I can remember and articulate what my priorities are through the rest of my life, then it all kind of falls into place, including the financial thing, because then you were talking about earlier, Ben, if your portfolio or your investment or your income flow is just going, not the way you had hoped, I'm sure always, it's either going up or down, right? Things. But you start to say, oh, well, while it's not that much fun, I know what my priorities are. And when you know that, then the rest is just playing it through, and it feels okay. And psychologically, and for myself, what doesn't feel okay is when your retirement, however you do success, doesn't line up with who you truly feel you are. You get that, and when that happens, you're just grumpy.
Yeah. So because again, doing more of what makes you who you are versus doing things that are not who you are, right? Is it kind of this, and then if your money's not tied to it, which I know Curtis and I talk a lot with our clients and our team here is all of a sudden it's like, well, hey, if we're telling people they can't do the thing that gives them the most purpose, which by the way, work is a very valid thing.
Yeah.
And it's something where, hey, maybe to your point about our bodies and our minds kind of having to change as we age, maybe we're not able to do as much, but we're able to do it in different ways. We're able to do it in different capacities. We're able to do it in different quantities, all those things, and adapting as we age to kind of do that. It's just, again, I know I'm kind of giving your answer back to you here a little bit, but it's something where I think when people discover that, they go, oh, it's a big exhale, because resources that are aligning to that, then it's like, I get it, I understand, and I am not changing a binge of vocation for a binge of vacation, right? It's kind of this purpose thing. So I think that was a really awesome answer in terms of kind of
absolutely
where we try to help our clients as well. So David, thank you so much for coming on our show today, sharing with us a lot of your knowledge and expertise. I know it was it's just, I think, helpful personally, but I know our clients too, and our listeners out there, that we can go back to this library, and it's a really great starting place. So thank you so much for coming on.
You're absolutely welcome. I have no idea how much time we spent. I will say it went very fast.
Yes.
So that's
exactly.
great for you guys.
All right, David, you be well. Take care.
Okay. You too.
So episode 80, managing
80.
anxiety as we age, right? We got to 80. So
80. We've made it.
Another decade here, right? We're getting older too, right?
Yeah.
We're experiencing aging.
Exactly.
So, yeah, really good to have David Prescott on. Obviously, I think, as you heard, just has a wealth of information around
absolutely
psychology, and especially anxiety. So this is just something that I know, Curtis, you and I and our team, we've talked about a lot, is you could just see anxiety and anxiousness around things.
Yeah.
So we always like to kind of highlight things that we took away from today's meeting. Curtis, what was a takeaway that you had about our conversation with David?
Yeah. One piece that really stuck out to me, Ben, and it's something I hadn't really thought about with anxiety. You mentioned both of us are both aware, and we see anxiety a lot. The point David was making about healthy versus unhealthy anxiety, or helpful versus not helpful anxiety, I think was what he said. It was just really interesting to me because, the point was being, it's normal and it's okay to have a little anxiety about these achievements or goals or whatever it is you're trying to achieve in your day-to-day life. And, he didn't explicitly say this, but the feeling I got was like, if you're worried a little bit about how you'll do or how you'll perform or what, it shows you care, right? If there's that little bit of anxious, it keeps you on edge, it keeps you focused. And and then obviously he talked about it building to being not helpful anxiety and unrealistic expectations, or wherever you want to go with that then becomes the spider web of anxiety disorders that we talked about. But for me, just to hear him talking about the helpful anxiety piece, it was something that I think as soon as he said it, it made sense to me, but I just hadn't heard it kind of expressed and presented that way. So I thought that was really helpful to hear.
Yeah, I agree. It's again, from a kind of I know the conversation we had with Cliff Singer, right, is this whole what is normal aging and cognitive health and memory versus what's kind of non-normal cognitive in memory aging there. So
exactly.
I think those are good lines to, maybe they're not like stark lines, but maybe they're gray there of, well, here's kind of where we're blending from my daily life and using kind of normal or kind of quote unquote just regular helpful anxiety versus non-helpful. So I think
Absolutely.
that was a key point. I want to add too is, again, we've had enough kind of client conversations over the years, and talking to people is, look, anxiety triggers. So it was something I really thought was interesting. We wanted to ask about, and we talked about financial insecurity, and something that we're seeing a lot is, Maine's a rural state. There's a lot of first generational wealth that's being experienced right now, where I've never had this much money in my life, and nobody in my family's ever kind of saved this level of wealth.
That's right.
So I have this thought about, anytime I start seeing my account balance drop, anytime I start spending from this balance, it's a trigger to me of going back to kind of where maybe I have a memory of, hey, we couldn't make that car payment and we got our car repossessed, right?
Yeah.
Or, geez, we were on food stamps, right? We were on SNAP, and we were, getting food banks, and we were needing to rely on that. I don't want to go back to that place, right? I worked my whole life to get out of that. I don't want to go back. So these triggers are, the insecurity triggers are really also anxiety triggers here, right? We start to talk about avoiding that of like, I don't want to see my account balance drop, so I'm not going to spend anything from it. I'm just going to live on nothing until I see that come back, and I avoid that. So I think those are things in our profession, as we're trying to help, our clients, is something to kind of keep in mind. And I think that was a really helpful kind of way to explore that. So again, those were really our highlights of the day. Obviously we'll give you some research and links here from, as David said, about the American Psychological Association, the National Institute of Mental Health. We'll have links there. In addition, we'll put some Northern Light Health Acadia Hospital links as well. So
absolutely,
go to our show notes. It's blog.guidancepointllc.com/80 for 80 for
80.
episode
80.
So you can go check that out there. Just a reminder, my name is Ben. His name is Curtis.
Exactly.
We are the Retirement Success in Maine podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate you tuning in and being on this journey with us. And we'll catch you next time.